Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling something that I think a lot of us take for granted. We usually think of it as a nuisance, a swollen ankle, a sore throat, that redness around a splinter.
Mm.
But if you actually dig into the mechanics of it, it is not a mistake. It is not just your body acting out. It is a highly sophisticated, tactical conversation between your cells.
It's a conversation that's fundamental to survival. In fact, without it, you wouldn't survive past infancy. Simple infections would be lethal.
Exactly. We're talking about inflammation and repair, and the way we are going to look at this today is pretty specific. We are synthesizing the core conceptual foundations of pathology from two absolute heavyweights in the field, Robbins and Cochrane pathologic basis of disease and Underwood's pathology.
These are the Bibles of pathology, really. If you go to medical school, these are the texts that shape how you understand disease. Robbins gives us that incredible breadth, the specific mechanisms, and this unifying systems framework. It tells us exactly how molecule A talks to molecule B.
And what does Underwood bring to the table?
I've always found Underwood fantastic for mechanistic clarity. It really grounds the understanding of disease as a response to injury. It connects the microscopic details, the cytokines, the cell receptors, back to the clinical reality of a patient in shock or a wound that's just failing to heal. It gives it that practical edge.
So we have the map and a compass. Now, before we jump in, we have to drop our standard disclaimer. This deep dive is an interpretive synthesis. It is a conceptual map to help you navigate these dense topics.
Right. It's a guide.
It does not replace the textbooks. If you are a student, you still have to do the active reading. We are here to help you see the forest and the trees, but you still have to hike the trail yourself.
Well put. Reading remains absolutely essential. You need to see the diagrams, the micrographs.
So what is our mission today? We are going to track the life cycle of a lesion. We're starting from that initial alarm bell, the moment of injury. Then we're going into the war zone of acute inflammation, then into what I think of as the siege warfare of chronic inflammation, and finally the reconstruction phase, which is repair.
And if there's one thing I want listeners to keep in the back of their minds throughout this entire discussion, it is the 5 R's. It's a great little framework from the source material.
The 5 R's. I love a good mnemonic. It makes complex processes stick.
It's the framework for the whole process. Recognition, recruitment, removal, regulation, and repair. If you can understand those 5 steps and the logic behind them, you understand inflammation.
And the big takeaway up front, before we even get into the weeds,
That inflammation is fundamentally protective. Its goal is to get rid of the problem and fix the damage.
but there's always a but in pathology, isn't there?
There always is. It's a double-edged sword. The same powerful chemicals that destroy bacteria can just as easily destroy your own healthy tissues if they aren't regulated perfectly. That's the tension we are going to explore today, the balance between defense and self-destruction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Section 1. What exactly is inflammation? Because I think people, they often confuse it with infection.
That's a really common point of confusion. Infection is the invasion by the bug, the bacteria, the virus. Inflammation is the host's response to that bug, or to any other injury for that matter.
So you can have inflammation without infection.
Absolutely. A
God.
sterile burn, a heart attack, an autoimmune reaction. No bugs involved, but you get a massive inflammatory response. The key part of the definition is that it is the response of vascularized tissues to infection and damage. That word vascularized is critical.
Meaning it has to have blood vessels.
It has to.
So if I scratch the surface of my cornea, which doesn't have blood vessels, does it get inflamed?
Not in the classic sense. You won't get the redness and swelling right there. The classic inflammatory response relies entirely on the circulation, on the blood vessels. The whole goal is to bring host defense molecules. We're talking leukocytes or white blood cells and plasma proteins from the blood, where they're normally just circulating peacefully, to the specific site of injury where they are desperately needed.
It's a logistics operation, a biological FedEx system for emergencies.
Precisely. It's a delivery system. And it serves to rid the host of both the initial cause of the injury, like the microbes or toxins, and the consequences of that injury, like the dead necrotic cells that are left behind. You have to clean up the battlefield.
And this is where we get those 5 R's you mentioned. Let's walk through them briefly just to set the stage. First up, recognition.
Recognition. Sentinel cells that live in the tissues, we're talking macrophages, dendritic cells, mast cells, they have to see the threat. They're the security guards patrolling the building, looking for broken windows or intruders.
Okay, so the guard sees something, then recruitment.
Once the threat is spotted, they sound the alarm to bring in the heavy artillery. That's recruitment. You are pulling those white blood cells and proteins out of the blood vessels and directing them into the tissue.
And once they're there, removal.
The battle itself, the process of eliminating the offender, whether it's a bacteria or a splinter, and then clearing out all the dead tissue, the cellular debris.
Then regulation. This one seems tricky, and maybe the most important.
It is arguably the most critical step for preventing chronic and autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
Regulation is the braking system. It's the stand-down order. You have to control the response so it doesn't just keep burning down the neighborhood after the initial fire is out.
A failure of regulation is basically friendly fire.
Exactly. And finally, the fifth are repair, fixing the damage, rebuilding. And as we will see later on, repair is almost always a compromise. You rarely, if ever, get back exactly what you had before the injury.
Now, Robbins makes a really interesting point about that double-edged sword concept. It says that misdirected or poorly regulated inflammation is actually the root of a lot of the major diseases we deal with today.
Absolutely. Think about it. Allergies. That is a massive inflammatory response directed against a completely harmless environmental substance, like pollen.
Right. Your body is launching a full-scale war against dust.
Or autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. That's inflammation relentlessly attacking your own joints. Even atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries that leads to heart attacks and strokes, is now understood to be, at its core, a chronic inflammatory process in the vessel wall.
So this mechanism, which is designed to save us from a splinter or a strep throat, is also the driver of some of the biggest killers in the modern world.
When it goes wrong, yes. The system is so powerful that when it's misdirected, the consequences are severe.
Okay, let's zoom in to the very beginning of the story. The alarm, section 2. Recognition and the vascular reaction. What sets this whole thing off? What's the trigger?
The triggers are varied. The most obvious one is infections, bacterial, viral, fungal, you name it. But also, really importantly, tissue necrosis.
So just cell death.
Just cell death. If cells die from a lack of oxygen, which is ischemia like in a heart attack or from physical trauma or burns, that dead and dying tissue releases chemicals that are potent triggers for inflammation.
So the body knows those cells are dead and need to be cleared out.
Exactly. Foreign bodies will do it too. Things like splinters, dirt, even surgical sutures, and, as we just mentioned, immune reactions, either autoimmune or allergic.
So how does the body know? You mentioned sentinel cells. Who are they and what are they looking for?
The main ones are the tissue-resident macrophages, dendritic cells, and mast cells. They are just sitting there in the connective tissue under your skin, in your gut, in your lungs, waiting. And they are equipped with an amazing array of specific receptors. The most famous family are the toll-like receptors, or TLRs.
Toll-like receptors sounds like a toll booth on a highway.
That's a perfect analogy. They check IDs. They are programmed to recognize specific patterns. We call them danger signals, or more technically, PAMs and DAMPs.
PAMs and DAMPs.
PAMs is pathogen-associated molecular pattern. These are things that microbes have, but human cells don't, like certain lipids or sugars in a bacterial cell wall. So the TLR sees that and knows this is not one of us.
And DAMPs.
Damage-associated molecular pattern. These are things that should be inside a healthy cell, but are suddenly found floating around outside of it.
Okay, give me an example.
Uric acid from DNA breakdown. ATP, which should be inside mitochondria making energy. Or even DNA itself. If a macrophage's receptor sees DNA just floating in the extracellular fluid, it knows a cell has burst open.
It's like seeing stuffing on the living room floor. You know the couch has been ripped open. Something has gone very wrong.
Exactly right. It's a sign of violent cell death. And when these receptors are triggered, they activate a complex inside the cell. And this thing has the coolest name in all of pathology, the inflammasome.
The inflammasome. It sounds like a transformer.
It sounds like a superhero gadget, and in a way it acts like one. The inflammasome is a multi-protein complex in the cytoplasm that gets assembled in response to these signals. Its main job is to activate an enzyme that then chops up a precursor molecule to produce active interleukin-1, or IL-1.
And IL-1 is the alarm bell.
IL-1 is one of the loudest alarm bells. It's a cytokine that screams, "We have a problem here," to the rest of the body, particularly to the blood vessels.
Okay, the alarm rings. IL-1 is flowing. What happens to the blood vessels? Because that's where the visible signs come from, isn't it? The redness, the heat, the swelling.
Yes, the 5 cardinal signs of inflammation described by Celsus 2,000 years ago, they all come from these vascular changes. There are 2 main things happening immediately: vasodilation and a massive increase in permeability.
Vasodilation first, making the pipes wider.
Exactly. Chemical mediators, primarily histamine released from those mast cells, act directly on the smooth muscle in the walls of the small arterioles, They relax, and the vessels dilate. They get wider. This increases blood flow into the local capillary bed.
And more blood means it looks redder and feels hotter. That explains the rubor, redness, and Kähler heat.
Correct, but then goes the second part, which is arguably even more important for the response. The increase in vascular permeability. The vessels become leaky.
The leak. Now, why, evolutionarily, would we want leaky blood vessels? It seems like a bad idea.
Because the soldiers, the leukocytes, and the supplies, the plasma proteins like antibodies and complement, are all trapped inside the vessel. The war is happening outside in the tissue. You need to open the gates of the fortress to let the army out.
Okay, so how does the vessel open the gates? How does it get leaky?
There are a couple of ways. The most common and fastest mechanism is the retraction of endothelial cells. The cells that form the inner lining of the vessel literally contract, kind of like little muscles pulling apart from each other, just enough to create small intercellular gaps.
What makes them do that?
This is triggered by mediators like histamine and bordetellin. It's very rapid, happens within minutes, but it's also short-lived. The gaps close up again pretty quickly.
And the second way?
Direct endothelial injury. This is more severe. If you have a serious burn or certain microbial toxins or trauma, the vessel lining cells are just killed, they die and slow off. That causes immediate and prolonged leakage because you have a physical hole in the wall.
Okay, so fluid is pouring out. Robbins makes a really important distinction here between exudate and transudate. What's the difference? This seems like a classic exam question.
It is a classic pathology distinction, and it's clinically very important. Transudate is basically just watery fluid. It's plasma ultrafiltrate. It happens when you have a pressure imbalance, hydrostatic pressure pushing fluid out, like in congestive heart failure. But the vessel wall itself is intact, so it's very low in protein. It's clear.
And exudate?
The exudate is what happens in inflammation, because the vessel has developed those gaps, not just water, but large proteins, and even cells can slip through. So exudate is protein-rich, cloudy fluid. Pus is a classic type of exudate, packed with neutrophils.
Got it. So fluid and protein are leaving the vessel to form this exudate. That must mean the blood that's left inside the vessel is getting thicker and more concentrated, right?
Exactly. We call this stasis. The blood flow slows right down because the liquid component is leaving. The red blood cells get concentrated, the viscosity of the blood increases, and everything gets sluggish. This sluggish flow is actually a crucial part of the process.
Why is that? I would think you'd want fast flow to get more cells there more quickly.
You want fast delivery to the general area, yes. But once the cells are there, you need the traffic to slow down to a crawl so the white blood cells can get off the highway. If the blood is rushing by at high speed, a neutrophil can't possibly grab the wall and find a place to exit. Stasis allows the leukocytes to fall out of the central column of flowing blood and move toward the edges of the vessel.
Margin.
That's the word. They move to the margins. And that leads us perfectly into Section 3, leukocyte recruitment, the commute. This is honestly one of the most fascinating biological processes I've ever read about. It's like a perfectly choreographed ballet of molecules. It is. The journey of a single neutrophil from the center of a blood vessel, across the wall, and into the tissue is an incredible multi-step process. We usually break it down into margination, rolling, adhesion, and transmigration.
Okay, let's start with margination and rolling. The blood has slowed down because of stasis. The heavier neutrophils are pushed to the wall.
Right. But the wall is normally very slippery. Endothelial cells are coated with molecules that repel cells. So to get a grip, the endothelial cells have to be activated by TNF and IL-1, for example, to express new molecules on their surface. These are the selectins.
P-selectin and E-selectin.
Exactly. You can think of these as providing weak, intermittent adhesion. They're like speed bumps or strips of weak Velcro.
Weak Velcro, I like that.
The leukocytes have the other half of the Velcro carbohydrate ligands that bind to the selectins. So they bind, the force of the blood flow breaks the bond, they tumble forward a bit, they bind again, detach, bind again. They literally roll along the vessel wall like tumbleweeds in the wind.
So they're not stopped, they're just dramatically slowed down, and they're scanning the surface as they go.
Precisely. They are sampling the environment. And this rolling brings them into contact with other signals on the surface, mainly chemokines.
Okay, so they are rolling along. Then comes the critical stop, adhesion.
This is the firm arrest. The molecules involved here are a different family called integrins on the leukocyte surface. We're talking about molecules like LFA1 and VLA4. Now here's the clever part. Normally these integrins are in a low affinity state. They are like folded up grappling hooks. They don't stick well.
So what activates them? What makes them unfold?
The chemokines that are being displayed on the endothelial surface. These signals coming from the site of injury bind to receptors on the rolling leukocyte and trigger an instantaneous conformational change in the integrins. They flip from a low affinity to a high affinity state.
The grappling hooks spring open.
They spring open and grab on tight to their ligands on the vessel wall molecules with names like ICAM1 and VCM1.
So the chemokines yell, "Stop here, this is the exit," and the neutrophil slams on the brakes.
And it sticks firmly. It is now completely immobilized on the vessel wall, even with blood flowing past it. Now it has to solve the next problem, how to get through the wall. This is transmigration, also known as diapedesis.
Squeezing through the crack.
Squeezing between the endothelial cells at those junctions that have opened up. There is a key molecule here called PCAM1, or CD31, that's present on both the leukocyte and the endothelial cells. It kind of helps guide the cell through the junction like a zipper.
Okay, the neutrophil is out of the vessel, it's in the tissue now, but it's a big, dark, confusing space. How does it know where the bacteria are?
Chemotaxis.
Yeah.
It follows the scent. It's an incredible process where the cell can sense a chemical gradient and move toward the higher concentration.
What's the scent?
It can be bacterial products like certain peptides. It can be some of those complement components we'll talk about later like C5a. Or it can be the chemokines produced by the sentinel macrophages like IL-8.
Robbins has this great visual of the cell moving. It says it uses an actin driver at the front and a myosin motor at the back. Can you break that down?
It's essentially crawling. The cell extends finger-like projections called filopodia at its leading edge by polymerizing actin filaments. It's like reaching out a hand. When it grabs on, the myosin motor at the back of the cell contracts, pulling the rest of the cell body forward. It's like a front-wheel drive car pulling itself along.
An amoeboid-like movement.
Exactly. And it follows this chemical breadcrumb trail right to the side of the action.
And who arrives first on the scene?
The neutrophils. They are the Marines. They are the first responders. In the first 6 to 24 hours of an acute inflammation, the tissue is swarming with neutrophils. They are the most numerous white blood cell in the blood. They respond fastest to chemokines, and they get there first.
But they don't last long. They're not built for a long campaign.
No, they're very short-lived. They have a lifespan of hours to a day or two in the tissues, and then they undergo apoptosis. That's programmed cell death. They do their job, and they die.
So who takes over?
After about 24 to 48 hours, the second wave arrives. The monocytes. These are larger cells that are a bit slower to arrive, but they are much more robust.
And once they get into the tissue, they transform.
They differentiate into macrophages. The macrophages are the heavier units. They are the cleanup crew and the construction foremen. They survive for much longer. They can actually proliferate in the tissue, and they are responsible for managing not just the killing, but also the subsequent cleanup and repair phases.
Okay, the troops are on the ground. The neutrophils are there. The macrophages are arriving. Section 4. The attack. Phagocytosis and killing. How do they actually destroy the threat?
The process is called phagocytosis, which literally means cell eating. It has 3 main steps. First, recognition and attachment. The microbe has to be recognized as a target.
And it helps if it's been tagged for destruction.
It helps immensely. The process of coating a microbe with tags is called opsonization. The main opsonins are antibodies, specifically IgG, and a complement protein called C3b. These are like eat me signals.
Yeah.
The neutrophil has receptors that recognize these tags.
So it's like painting a target on the enemy. Then comes engulfment.
The cell membrane of the phagocyte extends pseudopods that flow around the microbe, zipping up around it until it's completely enclosed in a bubble inside the cell. That bubble is called a phagosome.
So the enemy is now inside the fortress. And finally, killing and degradation. This is where the chemistry gets really intense.
It does. The phagosome fuses with a lysosome, which is a bag of digestive enzymes, to form a phagoglycosome. And then the real fireworks start.
Yeah.
A respiratory burst.
The respiratory burst. It sounds very dramatic.
It is. It's a rapid consumption of oxygen by the cell. There's an enzyme complex in the phagosome membrane called NADPH oxidase. It takes molecular oxygen and converts it into the superoxide free radical. This is highly reactive and damaging.
And doesn't stop there.
No. The superoxide is then converted spontaneously or by an enzyme into hydrogen peroxide.
Hydrogen peroxide, like the stuff in the brown bottle we use to clean cuts?
Exactly like that, but it's being generated right next to the microbe. But wait, it gets even deadlier. In neutrophils specifically, there is a very abundant enzyme in their granules called MPO myeloperoxidase.
MPO, okay.
MPO takes that hydrogen peroxide in the presence of chloride ions and converts it into hypochlorite, OCl negative.
Hypochlorite. Wait a minute, isn't that bleach?
It is the active ingredient in household bleach. Your neutrophils literally manufacture bleach inside their bodies to dissolve bacteria. It is an incredibly potent antimicrobial system.
That is absolutely metal. The body has its own Clorox factory.
It does. And there's more. Macrophages in particular can also generate another weapon, nitric oxide, or NO. And NO can react with that superoxide we mentioned earlier to form an even more toxic radical called peroxynitrite. So you have this cocktail of reactive oxygen and nitrogen species just destroying the microbes, proteins, lipids, and DNA.
Now, there's one more weapon mechanism mentioned in the text that I found totally wild, and it's a bit of a newer discovery. Nets, neutrophil extracellular traps.
Yes. Nets are fascinating. This is a mechanism of last resort, a kind of suicidal defense.
Describe this for us. It sounds like something out of science fiction.
Imagine a neutrophil that's engaged with a lot of bacteria and is perhaps overwhelmed. It decides to sacrifice itself for the greater good. It undergoes a unique form of cell death, where it dissolves its own nuclear membrane. It decondenses its chromatin, all its DNA, and mixes it with all those powerful antimicrobial proteins from its granules, the MPO, the enzymes, and then it essentially explodes.
It explodes. It lyses.
It shoots out this sticky, viscous web of chromatin, which is basically DNA strings, all mixed with poison. It casts a net into the extracellular space.
So it's a suicide net to trap the bacteria.
Exactly. The sticky DNA physically traps the bacteria, preventing them from spreading, and the high local concentration of antimicrobial proteins kills them. It's an incredible strategy, but of course, there is a downside.
There always is in biology.
That net is made of your own DNA and nuclear proteins. Normally, your immune system should never, ever see your own DNA. It's supposed to be safely hidden inside the nucleus of your cells. When you throw it out into the extracellular space in this very messy way, you are exposing what we call nuclear antigens to the immune system.
And if your body develops antibodies against those nuclear antigens, if it mistakes them for foreign.
You get lupus. Systemic lupus erythematosus.
Yeah.
One of the absolute hallmarks of lupus is the presence of anti-nuclear antibodies, particularly anti-DNA antibodies. It's now thought that nets, and this process called netosis, are a major fuel for the autoimmune fire in diseases like lupus.
Fascinating. So the very thing that's keeping a bacterial infection at bay could, in a susceptible person, trigger a lifelong devastating autoimmune disease.
That is the recurring theme of inflammation. Balance. Power and control.
Speaking of control, let's talk about the signals that orchestrate all of this. Section 5, the chemical mediators, the language of inflammation.
There are dozens and dozens of these, but we can group them into families. The general principle is that most of them have very short half-lives. You want a message that self-destructs quickly so the inflammation doesn't last forever and spread everywhere.
Right, a signal that fades. Let's hit the big ones. Vasoactive amines.
This is primarily histamine. We all know this one from allergy commercials. It is preformed and stored in the granules of mast cells. When the mast cell is triggered, it dumps all this histamine. It's the opener. It causes that immediate vasodilation and increased permeability we talked about. That's why antihistamine drugs work for a runny nose. They block the histamine receptors and stop the leak.
Okay, then the next big group, the arachidonic acid metabolites, the lipid mediators.
These are really important. They are synthesized on demand from the phospholipids in the cell membrane. There's an enzyme that cleaves off a fatty acid called arachidonic acid, and then it can go down one of two major pathways.
The COX pathway and the lipoxygenase pathway.
Exactly. The COX, or cyclooxygenase pathway, chews up the arachidonic acid and spits out prostaglandins.
Prostaglandins, these are the ones responsible for pain, right? The dolor.
Pain and fever. This is a crucially important point for pharmacology. Aspirin and NSAIDs like ibuprofen work by inhibiting the COX enzymes. If you stop COX, you stop prostaglandin production. No prostaglandins means less pain and less fever.
A huge part of modern medicine is based on blocking this one pathway.
A massive part. And the other arm of that pathway, the lipoxygenase pathway, produces leukotrienes. They are potent chemoattractants. They are part of the scent that calls the white blood cells in, and they also cause vasoconstriction and bronchospasm. Asthma drugs, like montelukast, often work by targeting the leukotriene pathway.
Then we have the cytokines. We already mentioned IL-1.
The big two in acute inflammation are tumor necrosis factor, TNF, and interleukin-1, IL-1. These are the master regulators. They're produced by the activated macrophages. Their main job is to activate the endothelium. They tell the blood vessels to put up those adhesion molecules, the selectins and the integrin ligands that we talked about earlier. Without TNF and IL-1, the soldiers just drive right past the war zone.
They turn the slippery vessel wall into sticky flypaper.
A perfect description. They also cause the systemic effects like fever.
And finally, a really complex one, the complement system.
This is a system of about 20 different proteins, C1 through C9, that circulate in the plasma in an inactive form. When the cascade is triggered, they get sequentially cleaved and activated. It has three main functions in inflammation.
Okay, what are they?
First, inflammation. Some of the fragments, like C3a and C5a, are powerful chemoattractants for neutrophils and also cause histamine release from mast cells. Second, opsonization. A key fragment, C3b, is a major opsonin. It coats bacteria and targets them for phagocytosis.
And third?
Cell lysis. The end product of the cascade is the formation of the membrane attack complex, or MAC. This is a structure that literally punches a hole, a pore, right through the bacterial cell membrane, causing it to lyse and die.
It's a massive orchestra of signals, all interacting.
And it has to be conducted perfectly. If the conductor falls asleep, you get unchecked infection. If the brass section plays way too loud, you can get systemic shock.
Which brings us to the next logical point, the outcomes. Section 6. The battle is raging. How does it end? What are the possible endings to this story?
There are three main roads you can go down after an acute inflammatory response. Ideally, you get resolution.
The happy ending. Back to normal.
As close as you can get. The injurious agent is neutralized, the neutrophils die off, the macrophages eat all the dead cells and debris, the edema fluid drains away into the lymphatics, and the tissue architecture returns to normal, like it never happened.
Okay, what's road number 2?
PUS, or separation. This often happens with certain bacteria that are particularly good at attracting neutrophils, so-called pyogenic or pus-producing bacteria like Staphylococcus. You get a massive collection of neutrophils, both living and dead, mixed with liquefied necrotic cells and edema fluid.
An abscess.
If that collection of pus is walled off by a fibrous capsule, it's an abscess. The body has contained the infection, but it can't clear it. It just sits there as a pocket of pus.
And road number 3.
Chronic inflammation. This happens if the offending agent persists, like an infection that can't be cleared, or if there's some interference with the normal healing process. The body isn't able to win the war quickly, so it settles in for a long, drawn-out siege.
Before we move on to chronic inflammation, let's quickly visualize some of these patterns. Robbins lists a few key morphologic patterns, what the inflammation actually looks like.
Right. These are what a pathologist or a surgeon would see with the naked eye. First is serous inflammation. This is characterized by a thin, watery fluid and exudate with very few cells. Think of the fluid inside a skin blister from a burn. That's serous inflammation.
Typical enough. What's next?
Fibrinous inflammation. This is when the vascular leak is more severe, big enough for large molecules like fibrinogen to get out of the blood. The fibrinogen then gets converted to fibrin, which forms a thick, sticky, stringy meshwork. You often see this on the lining of body cavities, like the pericardium around the heart or the pleura around the lungs.
And that can cause problems later as...
Yes, if that fibrin isn't cleared away, it can get organized by fibroblasts and lead to scarring and adhesions. Then there's purulent or suppurative inflammation. That's the pus we just talked about. Appendicitis is a classic example of an organ full of purulent inflammation.
And the last one is an ulcer.
An ulcer. This is a local defect, or excavation, on the surface of an organ or tissue that's produced by the shedding of inflamed necrotic tissue. The classic example is a peptic ulcer in the stomach or duodenum. You've literally eroded a crater into the lining.
Okay, let's go down that third road now. The siege, section 7. Chronic inflammation.
So chronic inflammation is defined by its prolonged duration. We're talking weeks or months. And by the fact that active inflammation, tissue injury, and attempted repair are all happening simultaneously in the same place.
In acute inflammation, it's a nice, clean sequence. Injury, then the battle, then the cleanup, then repair. Here, it's a complete mosh pit. Everything is happening at once.
Exactly. And the cast of characters changes dramatically. The neutrophils, the stars of the acute show, are mostly gone. Now, it's the era of the mononuclear cells, primarily macrophages and lymphocytes.
Let's talk about the macrophage. You called it the conductor of this whole orchestra. It seems central to everything.
The macrophage is arguably the most important and versatile cell in chronic inflammation. It's the central player. And what's fascinating is that it can adopt two very different personalities, or activation states, which we often call M1 and M2.
M1 and M2, the Jekyll and Hyde of the immune system.
In a way, yes. The M1 is the classically activated macrophage. It gets activated by signals like interferon gamma, which is typically produced by T cells, and also by microbial products. The M1 macrophage is a professional killer. It produces ROS, nitric oxide, and lysosomal enzymes. Its job is destruction of microbes and damaged tissue.
It's the burn it all down macrophage.
Right. And the M2 is the alternatively activated macrophage. It's induced by different cytokines like IL-4 and IL-13. The M2 macrophage is a fixer, or repairman. It produces growth factors that promote tissue repair, angiogenesis, and fibrosis, or scarring. It also releases anti-inflammatory cytokines to help dampen the inflammatory response.
So M1 burns the village down to kill the invaders, and M2 comes in afterwards to try and rebuild it.
A perfect analogy. The problem in many chronic inflammatory diseases is that this balance gets completely skewed. If you have persistent M1 activation because of a stubborn infection or an autoimmune trigger, you get ongoing, relentless tissue destruction. If you have excessive or inappropriate M2 activation, you can get pathologic fibrosis and scarring.
And what about the lymphocytes, the T and B cells?
They are critical for amplifying and sustaining the response. Macrophages present antigens to T cells, activating them. The activated T cells then produce cytokines like interferon gamma that are potent activators of more macrophages.
So it's a vicious cycle.
It is a self-sustaining loop. The macrophages and lymphocytes talk back and forth to each other, keeping each other activated and in the tissue. That's why chronic inflammation is so persistent and hard to stop.
Now, there is a very specific, distinct pattern of chronic inflammation called granulomatous inflammation. This is a big buzzword in pathology.
It is, because when you see it under the microscope, it tells you a lot about what might be going on. A granuloma is a very specific, organized structure. It's an attempt by the body to wall off something that it finds very difficult to eliminate.
Like tuberculosis. That's the textbook example.
Tuberculosis is the classic cause of granulomatous inflammation. The body's immune cells can't easily digest and destroy the mycobacterium, so the macrophages undergo a dramatic transformation. They become epithelioid cells. They start to look a bit like skin cells. They become large with lots of pink cytoplasm.
And they all cluster together.
They aggregate tightly. Sometimes they even fuse together to form giant cells, literally one huge cell with 20 or 30 nuclei inside. They form a ball around the offending agent, surrounded by a collar of lymphocytes.
It's a biological prison.
It is. It's the body's way of containing a threat it can't kill. And it often works, but at a cost. It destroys the normal tissue where the prison is built. In TB, the center of the granuloma often dies due to lack of oxygen and the toxic effects of the immune cells. This creates caseous necrosis. It's a crumbly, white, cheese-like debris.
Gross. But effective, I suppose.
Mostly. But it means you now have a hole in your lung where that granuloma was. It's another example of a compromise.
Let's zoom out from the local tissue to the whole body. Section 8. Systemic effects. When I have the flu or a bad infection, I feel terrible all over. My muscles ache. I have a fever. I have no appetite. Why? It's not like the virus is in my muscles.
That's the acute phase response. It's driven by those cytokines TNF, IL-1, and another one called IL-6, which don't just stay local. They get into the bloodstream and circulate throughout the body.
So they hit the brain, and that causes the fever.
Specifically, they hit a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which is the body's thermostat. They stimulate the local production of prostaglandins there, and the prostaglandins reset the body's thermostat to a higher temperature. A fever is not a malfunction. It's a centrally controlled response.
And what about the blood work? The doctor always checks the white count and the CRP.
Right. Those cytokines also go to the bone marrow and tell it to ramp up production of white blood cells. This is leukocytosis. You might even see a shift to the left, which is a classic sign of a bad infection. It means that the demand is so high that the bone marrow is releasing immature neutrophils into the blood before they're fully ready.
The factory is pushing cars off the assembly line before the paint is dry.
Great analogy. And IL-6 in particular goes to the liver and tells it to pump out a whole suite of proteins called acute phase proteins. The two big ones we measure are C-reactive protein, or CRP, and fibrinogen.
CRP is a very common blood marker for inflammation.
Yes. It acts as an opsonin and helps activate complement. And fibrinogen is a clotting protein, but it also has the interesting effect of making red blood cells stick together and stack up like coins. This makes them heavier, so they settle faster in a test tube. That's why your ESR, or erythrocyte sedimentation rate, goes up when you are inflamed.
Now, Underwood adds a darker note here, a sort of danger zone section. What happens if this systemic response goes haywire?
This is when inflammation becomes truly life-threatening. You get sepsis and potentially septic shock. If you have a massive bacterial infection, for example, The levels of TNF and other cytokines in the blood can become overwhelming.
And what do those massive levels of cytokines do?
They cause widespread systemic vasodilation. All your blood vessels dilate at once. Your blood pressure crashes catastrophically. That's hypotension. They also make your heart contract more weakly. Your heart starts to fail. It's a state of circulatory collapse.
And you can also get DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation.
Yes. The inflammatory mediators and bacterial toxins can trigger the clotting cascade to fire off in small vessels all over the body. You start forming thousands of tiny clots. This uses up all your platelets and clotting factors. So paradoxically, you are clotting and bleeding at the same time. It's a catastrophic failure of all the regulatory systems.
That's terrifying. It really, really highlights the importance of that regulation step we talked about at the very beginning.
Absolutely. Inflammation is powerful energy. If you can't contain it and regulate it, it will burn you up from the inside out.
Okay. Let's assume we survive the battle. The infection is cleared, the smoke clears, now we have to rebuild. Section 9, tissue repair.
Right. The war is over, now for the reconstruction. And repair has two main phases, regeneration and scarring.
And what determines which one we get?
Two main things. The type of tissue that was injured and the severity of the injury.
Let's talk regeneration first. This is the dream scenario, right?
Yeah.
Good as new.
It is. Regeneration is the replacement of damaged tissue with native tissue, restoring normal structure and function. But it can only happen if the tissue is made of cells that can divide, that have regenerative capacity. We call these labile tissues, like the skin or the gut lining, which are constantly turning over, or stable tissues, like the liver or kidney, whose cells are normally quiet but can be induced to divide if needed.
So if I have a heart attack, the heart muscle doesn't grow back.
Correct. Cardiac muscle cells and neurons in the brain are permanent tissues. They can't divide. Once they're dead, they're gone for good. And that brings us to the second path, scarring or fibrosis.
So this happens if the tissue can't regenerate or, and this is a key point from Robbins, if the underlying structural framework, the scaffolding of the tissue, is destroyed.
That's a critical point. Even the liver, which has incredible regenerative capacity, can't regenerate properly if the connective tissue framework is destroyed, like in chronic hepatitis.
Oh.
You need the blueprint to rebuild the house correctly. If the blueprint is gone, you just fill the hole with concrete.
And that concrete is the scar. So what are the steps of building a scar? It seems like another highly organized process.
It's a construction project. It starts immediately after the injury. First, hemostasis, you have to plug the hole. A blood clot made of platelets and fibrin forms to stop the bleeding and provide a temporary scaffold.
Then the inflammation we've been talking about.
Yes, the M1 macrophages come in to clear the debris. You can't build on top of rubble. Then you get cell proliferation. Epithelial cells from the edges of the wound start to migrate and divide to cover the surface.
And you need to supply the construction site.
Exactly. Angiogenesis. New blood vessels have to sprout from the existing ones to bring in oxygen and nutrients. This process is driven by growth factors, most importantly, VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. These new vessels are leaky, which contributes to the edema.
This is where we see granulation tissue. Is that related to the angiogenesis?
It is the hallmark of healing. If you pick a scab, which you shouldn't do, and you see that pink, soft, bumpy-looking tissue underneath, that is granulation tissue. It's a mix of these new, fragile blood vessels, proliferating fibroblasts, and a loose, watery extracellular matrix. It's the temporary patch that fills the wound space.
So we have the temporary patch. How does it become a sturdy, permanent scar?
The fibroblasts, which are the cells that make connective tissue, start to lay down collagen. This is the deposition phase. Initially, they lay down a flimsy type 3 collagen, but later this is replaced by the much stronger type I collagen. This whole process is driven by the most important fibrogenic cytokine, TGF-beta.
Transforming growth factor beta.
Yes, it's the master switch for fibrosis. And finally, you get remodeling. The scar isn't static. It matures over weeks and months. Enzymes called MMPs, or matrix metalloproteinases, chew up the excess, disorganized collagen, and it gets relayed in a more organized way to increase tensile strength.
MMPs. They need zinc to work, right? That's why zinc is important for wound healing.
They are zinc-dependent enzymes, yes. And at the same time, some fibroblasts differentiate into myofibroblasts. These are special fibroblasts that have muscle-like properties. They can contract and pull the edges of the wound together, shrinking the size of the scar.
So we have built the scar. What can go wrong in this process? What can impede repair?
Lots of things. Infection is the single most common cause of delayed healing. It keeps the inflammatory phase going and prevents the shift to the repair phase.
Makes sense.
Diabetes is a huge one. It impairs blood flow and immune function.
Yeah.
Nutritional deficiency, if you don't have enough vitamin C, you can't make collagen properly, that's scurvy. Poor blood supply from vascular disease, even medications. Steroids are powerful anti-inflammatory drugs, but they also inhibit TGF-beta, so they weaken the scar and impair healing.
And sometimes the repair process itself becomes pathological. It goes too far.
Exactly. You can get keloids. This is when the stop signal for collagen deposition fails. You get an excessive tumor-like growth of scar tissue that grows beyond the boundaries of the original wound. Or you can get proud flesh, which is exuberant granulation tissue that grows so much it actually blocks the skin from growing over the top.
It really is a delicate balance at every single stage.
It is, as we said before, it's a negotiated compromise between getting the job done and maintaining normal function.
And that really brings us to the end of the life cycle. We've gone from the alarm of IL-1 and the toll-like receptors to the recruitment of the neutrophil marines, the chemical warfare of ROS and MPO, the long siege of the macrophages, and finally, the reconstruction by the fibroblasts and TGF-beta.
It's an epic narrative with multiple acts happening in your body right now, probably in a dozen microscopic places you aren't even aware of, every time you shave, every time you bump into something.
So let's bring it all together. What does this all mean for us? Why does a deeper understanding of this matter for anyone, student or not?
Because pathology explains the clinical picture. It's the why. The fever isn't just sickness. It's IL-1 acting on your hypothalamus. The swelling in your sprained ankle isn't just fluid. It's the vehicle for the antibodies and complement proteins that need to get to the damaged ligaments. The scar on your knee isn't just a mark. It's the evidence of a permanent alteration in tissue architecture that has less tensile strength than the original skin.
So when you see a patient, you aren't just seeing a list of symptoms. You are seeing the outward manifestation of these cellular and molecular mechanisms.
You are. And understanding the mechanism allows you to intervene intelligently.
And here is a final provocative thought to leave you with, something that really struck me from the reading. Consider the macrophage.
Ah, yes. The hero and the villain of our story.
The very same cell type that directs the ruthless, bleach-wielding destruction of the enemy, the M1 phenotype, is the exact same cell responsible for orchestrating the rebuilding of the city with growth factors, the M2 phenotype. It holds the power of life and death, destruction and creation, all within one cell membrane.
And the switch between those two states, driven by the local cytokine environment, is what determines whether you heal or whether you descend into a smoldering, destructive chronic disease.
Healing is not a return to the past. It is a new reality. A scar restores continuity, but it alters the architecture forever. You are patched, but you are changed.
Deep stuff, but true. Pathology is full of those kinds of profound truths.
That's why we call it the deep dive. Listeners, do us a favor. After this, open Robbins or Underwood. Go to the inflammation chapter. Look at the diagram of the leukocyte recruitment cascade. Find a micrograph of a granuloma. We've given you the map, the conceptual framework, but the text is the territory. Go explore it.
You'll see it with new eyes now. See you next time.
Thanks for listening.